Welcome to Audit the Audit, where we sort out the who and what and the right and wrong of police interactions. This episode covers free speech, assault, and impeding traffic, and comes to us from Matthew Wiersema's channel. Be sure to check out the description below and give them the credit that they deserve. Before we dive into the episode, I want to give a shout out to Opinion Outpost for sponsoring this video. Opinion Outpost is one of the few legitimate and easy ways to make extra cash online. You get paid for your opinion, so you can make money while watching Netflix, hanging out with friends, or waiting for a bus. Wherever there is Wi-Fi, there is money to be made, and you can use your extra money for a vacation, some new tools, or whatever you might need. I use the money I make from Opinion Outpost to cover all the odd and end expenses that come with running this channel, like paying for the Adobe suite and a Vimeo subscription. Click on my link in the description to start making money now from wherever you are. Thanks again to Opinion Outpost for sponsoring this video. On the morning of January 15th, 2019, 26-year-old Aurora resident Matthew Wiersema was distributing graphic anti-abortion pamphlets to parents and students as they drove into the Walther Christian Academy in Melrose Park, Illinois. Mr. Wiersema is affiliated with many controversial and religiously motivated anti-abortion activist groups, such as Operation Save America, and regularly participates in organized anti-abortion protest. Shortly after arriving and handing out a few pamphlets, Mr. Wiersema is contacted by the head of Walther Christian Academy, Wayne Wenzel.
This is private property. This is private property.
Oh, this is a public sidewalk.
Property. This is Walther
No, it's
Christian
not.
Academy.
Okay.
Walther Christian Academy.
Yep.
And that's St. Paul. This is private property. So I'm going to ask you to kindly leave before I call the police.
Well, people have a right to walk down the sidewalk and be on the sidewalk.
This is not a sidewalk. All right, man.
You can call the cops.
I'm going to. Hey, this is a school, dude.
Yeah, that's why it's good to be here to educate students.
Dude, you need to get off. Now you're on private property. You need to get out
No,
of
I'm
here.
not. This is a sidewalk. Look at the sidewalk. This is a sidewalk, sir.
This is not a sidewalk. This is private property.
There's a public easement. Even if it's private property, I still have the right to be here because it's a public easement. People need to be able to walk alongside the road.
Thank you.
If there wasn't a public easement, then people wouldn't be able to walk alongside the road.
All right, man.
So I have the right to be here.
Although the Supreme Court has designated sidewalks and public easements as traditional public forums for expressive acts, there are more factors to consider than Mr. Wiersema's location. In the 2014 Illinois Appellate Court case of the City of Chicago versus Alexander, the court noted that the First Amendment does not guarantee the right to communicate one's views at all times and places or in any manner that may be desired, and that a state may therefore impose reasonable restrictions on the time, place, or manner of constitutionally protected speech occurring in a public forum. This ruling stems from a litany of Supreme Court decisions affirming the notion of content-neutral free speech restrictions. As a response to the Supreme Court's endorsement of reasonable free speech restrictions, many cities and townships have drafted restrictive ordinances with varying degrees of enforceability. Sections 9.04.070 through 9.04.90 of the Melrose Park Municipal Code bans the sale, circulation, distribution, exhibition, possession, or publication of any obscene, indecent, or immoral book, pamphlet, paper, or other representation. The constitutionality of these ordinances, and others like them, is questionable, and many similar ordinances have been struck down by higher courts in the past. A key element of the ordinances is the phrase obscene, indecent, or immoral, and the Melrose Park Municipal Code does not offer a specific definition for any of those words. The distinction between free speech and obscenity has a rich history within higher courts, which culminated in a three-pronged test established by Justice Warren Burger in the 1973 case of Miller versus California. The Miller test applies three standards to determine whether speech is considered obscene: whether the average community member would find the work disturbing, whether the work depicts sexual conduct in an offensive way, and whether the work lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. The work is considered obscene only if all three conditions are satisfied. Given that the graphic imagery of Mr. Wiersema's distribution is politically motivated, it is unlikely that a court would consider the pamphlets obscene. However, considering the totality of circumstances, a court may find that the act of distributing graphic imagery outside of a school, as parents and students come and go, is not compliant with the reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions restrictions imposed by the state of Illinois and the city of Melrose Park. It is impossible to know how a court would rule before a trial, but until the ordinance is struck down and Mr. Wiersma's speech is considered protected by a court, officers of the Melrose Park Police Department do have the authority to cite or arrest Mr. Wiersma under Section 9.04.070. Nonetheless, Mr. Wiersma continues to squabble with Mr. Wenzel, and eventually, Mr. Wenzel and a fellow student passively attempt to block Mr. Wiersma from the incoming vehicles.
With the message, man, it's cool, dude. Can you go across the street and just be smart and not screw up my flow of traffic? You're screwing up the flow of traffic.
No, man, people need to get educated.
You are screwing up the flow of traffic. Okay? This is a public, this is a private school. Take it across the street. Take it across the street. Why not?
This is a...
Do you want me to call his own car for him? Yeah, please. And also tell Mrs. Scholl to call the police.
Hey, sir, please stop moving with your body.
Man, now you just hit a young kid. That's assault, sir.
No, actually, he was moving me with his body.
I saw you hit this kid.
Like most states, Illinois considers assault and battery two separate crimes which are inherently linked, but distinctly different. Battery is defined as causing bodily harm to an individual or making physical contact of an insulting or provoking nature with an individual. And an assault is when an individual knowingly engages in conduct which places another in reasonable apprehension of receiving a battery. Both of these are Class C misdemeanors, but can be upgraded to a felony aggravated charge depending on the severity of the crime. Intention is a major factor in courts determining whether an assault has occurred. Advancing on someone with clenched or raised fists is an assault. Words alone are not an assault in Illinois, but threatening to beat someone when said in a menacing or angry manner and accompanied by conduct consistent with the threat is an assault if the words and conduct cause the victim to reasonably believe that he is about to be struck or injured. Because no one in this interaction is intentionally inflicting or threatening to inflict bodily harm on anyone else, it will be difficult to charge anyone with assault or battery.
He was moving me with his body while I was walking.
I saw you hit this kid.
Stop trying to get in my way when I'm walking towards people.
These are my families that don't want to deal with you.
Why not? What's wrong? I'm not doing anything wrong.
Flow of traffic, dude.
All they have to do is stop, take a pamphlet, and then we're all good. Look at that.
Nobody.
You can take a pamphlet and learn.
I think you're an idiot. You're blocking the flow of traffic here. Sir? You're blocking the flow of traffic here.
Look at that. Look at that.
No, we already called Melrose Park. This guy's going to jail. Can you get out of the way so they can get into the
They're coming in. I'm not impeding them.
Yeah,
they're the ones who are stopping to take the pamphlet, right?
Yeah,
no, I'm not. No, I'm not. They're the ones who are deciding to stop to take the pamphlet.
Yeah, they're trying to.
I have not impeded their flow. I have handed them pamphlets. Hello. Why are you so angry?
I asked you kindly to go across the street.
Why don't you want me here though?
Because I asked you kindly to go across the street. And now I'm calling the police because now you're starting to piss me off.
Sir, you are on private property. You cannot be on private property, okay?
Yes, I can. It's a public easement.
As Mr. Wiersma debates with the other school officials, Mr. Wenzel walks to the corner of the street and confiscates a sign that Mr. Wiersma had posted there earlier. Section 12.04.100 of the Melrose Park Municipal Code states that it is unlawful for any person to use any street or public property as space for the display of any signs, placards, or any printed material. This is yet another constitutionally questionable Melrose Park ordinance, but is enforceable as it is currently interpreted. However, Mr. Wenzel does not retain the authority to enforce that ordinance, and it is possible that seizing Mr. Wiersma's sign could constitute a criminal act. Only officers of the Melrose Park Police Department possess the authority to forcibly remove Mr. Wiersma's sign. And soon after Mr. Wenzel retrieves the sign, Officer Schiller arrives on the scene.
I don't know. This maniac's a school property, and I asked him to go across the street. What are you guys doing?
I'm trying to hand people pamphlets while they're driving in, and these people are getting in front of me while I'm trying to walk. I'm not on school property. Well, if I am, there's a right to be on a public easement. You see the sidewalk right there?
Okay.
So I can be on the sidewalk, right?
Do you have a permit to be on here?
No, I don't need a permit to be on a public easement, sir.
You need to step off. You can actually stand on that sidewalk right over there. This is school property, so yes, that is what I'm saying. I'm saying you need to be on that sidewalk there, and that's what you can do. So
what do you mean that sidewalk there? What do you mean by that?
The sidewalk along 9th Avenue, which is a public easement and is not school property, you need to be outside of the flow of vehicles and you need to be off of school property. So that needs to happen now.
Can you tell them to get my sign off their property? He stole my sign and put it on their property.
I took it off school property.
Get over there.
Can I have my sign?
Get over there.
Mr. Wiersma was handcuffed, put in a police car, and driven to nearby Maywood, where the officers released him but kept his camera. Later that day, Mr. Wiersma returned to the Melrose Park police station to file a complaint and retrieve his camera. 2 days later, Melrose Park spokesman Gary Mack told the Chicago Sun-Times that an internal investigation into the officers' behavior is underway, and the officers' catch-and-release tactic is, quote, absolutely not a policy. And shall we say at the very least, it sounds unorthodox and potentially much more than that. Mr. Wenzel lost his job sometime in late 2019, but it is unclear whether he was fired or resigned, or whether it had anything to do with this interaction. He did show some remorse in an October 2019 tweet lamenting that he had his dream job for 15 years but wasn't able to hold on to it. Whether or not Mr. Wiersma will seek legal action is unknown, but he did tell the Chicago Sun-Times that he believed he was kidnapped and he hoped that the officers repented their sins. Overall, Officer Schiller and the Melrose Park Police Department get a B-, because although they did enforce the law as it is interpreted under its current understanding, the officers failed to consider the spectrum of legal principles at play during this interaction and seized Mr. Wiersma's camera without charging him with a crime. Despite their misunderstanding of a public easement, the MPPD officers were indirectly within their authority to remove Mr. Wiersma from the property through the enforcement of the questionable Melrose Park ordinances. It is difficult to fault officers for enforcing laws as they are written, but the officers' utter disregard for Mr. Wiersma's perspective and his subsequent arrest and release add glaring negative connotations to the officer's conduct. The Melrose Park Police Department does deserve some credit for taking Mr. Wiersma's misconduct claims seriously and launching a timely internal investigation into the matter. Mr. Wiersma gets a B+, because although he may have been within his rights to distribute pamphlets on a public easement, he was creating a legitimate safety and traffic concern by walking up to moving vehicles, and his decision to target students with graphic material is legally and ethically dubious. While student outreach may be considered a noble pursuit to Mr. Wiersma's political agenda, it is easy to understand why a court would consider distributing graphic imagery outside of a school bustling with morning traffic as an unreasonable expression of free speech. And it is relatively reasonable for parents and school officials to be concerned about Mr. Wiersma's actions. Municipalities typically condone distributing pamphlets to vehicles stopped at an intersection, but wading into oncoming traffic to deliver a pamphlet could certainly be considered a hazard. Mr. Wiersma deserves recognition for his constitutional awareness, civil vigilance, and collected demeanor, but much of his conduct would likely fall out of line with the court. Whether or not you agree with Mr. Wiersma's message, he is afforded the same rights that we all enjoy under the protection of the First Amendment, as well as the same restrictions. Mr. Wenzel gets a C-, because although he appeared to be acting with the best interest of the Walther Academy families in mind, he did allow his emotions to cloud his judgment, and confiscated Mr. Wiersma's sign without the proper authority to do so. Mr. Wenzel's actions were completely unprofessional, and it would be no surprise to learn that he lost his position as a result of this interaction. It is worth noting that Mr. Wenzel never showed disdain for Mr. Wiersma's content itself, but focused on the fact that he was blocking and disturbing traffic. As we discussed earlier in the video, an important facet of restricting free speech is remaining content neutral and only restricting the means by which speech is conveyed, not the speech itself. Mr. Wenzel also offered to provide Mr. Wiersma with an alternative means of exercising his rights by asking him to go across the street, which is another major aspect of restricting speech. Ultimately, Mr. Wenzel's objective was not to silence Mr. Wiersma, but to move him to a more appropriate location. But while Mr. Wenzel's concerns seem somewhat reasonable, the actions he took to achieve that goal were not. Let us know if there is an interaction or legal topic you would like us to cover in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more police interaction content.